Before today's story begins, a warning. If you have a weak heart, stop the video now. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights. I'm Azad, and you're watching Chomchom. Today's terrifying real experience was sent by our viewer, Rayhan. Let's step into the darkness.
In the summer of 1969, deep inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a family camping trip slowly turned into one of the most unsettling missing child cases in American history. The mountains were calm and beautiful on the surface, covered in endless green forests, drifting mist, and quiet, winding trails. But beneath that beauty, the wilderness felt endless and unpredictable. The Martin family from Knoxville, Tennessee, had arrived for their traditional Father's Day weekend trip. It was supposed to be simple and peaceful, camping, hiking, and spending time together in nature. 6-year-old Dennis Martin came along with his father, his older brother, and his grandfather. Nothing about the day felt unusual. The weather was clear, the air was fresh, and the forest felt alive but safe. They moved through areas near Cades Cove in Spence Field, not far from the Appalachian Trail. Along the way, they met another family, and soon the children from both groups began playing together in the forest. Laughter echoed through the trees as they ran between trunks, climbed over fallen logs, and disappeared into patches of sunlight and shadow. For a short time, everything felt normal. At one point, the children decided to play a simple prank. They would hide in the forest and jump out to surprise the adults. One by one, they ran into the thick brush surrounding the clearing, each choosing a hiding place among the dense trees. Dennis Martin was last seen walking into that brush. There was nothing unusual about it. No fear, no hesitation. Just a child stepping into the forest as part of a game. But that moment would become the last confirmed sighting of him. The other children eventually returned from their hiding spots, but Dennis did not. At first, the adults assumed he was simply taking longer. The forest was thick, and children often got carried away in play. But as minutes passed, the feeling changed. Something was wrong. Calls for Dennis began echoing through the woods. His name was shouted again and again, growing louder and more desperate. But the forest gave no answer, no movement, no sound, no sign of life in the brush. His father immediately moved toward the exact place where Dennis had entered. The bushes were still, the ground uneven, and the forest completely silent. But there was no trace of a child. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. In a matter of minutes, a simple game in the Smoky Mountains turned into something far more terrifying. And Dennis Martin.
The disappearance of Dennis Martin did not stay a small campsite concern for long. Within moments, confusion turned into panic. The forest that had once felt peaceful now seemed endless and unforgiving, as if it had quietly taken something and refused to give it back. His father did not wait for help. He immediately rushed into the direction where Dennis was last seen, pushing through thick undergrowth and scanning every direction. He called his son's name repeatedly, his voice breaking through the trees and disappearing into silence. The Appalachian Trail stretched nearby, wide and empty, offering no clues at all. He went farther than anyone expected a small child could travel alone, over uneven ground, through dense brush, across rocky terrain. Nearly 2 miles of searching produced nothing. No movement, no cries, no footprints that made sense. Only silence.
When he finally stopped, it wasn't because he found his son. It was because he realized there was nothing to find. He returned to the campsite and reported Dennis missing immediately. Within a short time, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park launched a massive search operation. Rangers, volunteers, and law enforcement arrived quickly, turning the forest into an active emergency zone filled with radios, voices, and movement. The search expanded rapidly. Helicopters scanned the ridges from above. Search dogs were brought in to track scent trails through the forest floor. Teams spread across miles of rugged terrain, cutting through valleys, climbing slopes, and searching every possible direction. But the mountain did not respond. Then the weather turned. Heavy rain moved into the region, soaking the forest and washing away any possible trace. Trails turned into mud, streams rose and swallowed footprints. Fog rolled in thick, reducing visibility and making the search even more difficult. It was as if the land itself was erasing evidence. Despite hundreds of searchers and massive effort, there was still no confirmed sign of Dennis Martin. Only unanswered silence remained in the Smoky Mountains.
As days passed in the Smoky Mountains, the search for Dennis Martin became one of the largest operations the park had ever seen. What began as a family emergency had now turned into a full-scale mission involving hundreds of people. Rangers, volunteers, law enforcement, and even military personnel worked together, combing through every possible inch of terrain. Helicopters flew low over the ridges, scanning for any sign of movement. Search dogs were repeatedly brought back to the original area, trying to pick up a scent that never seemed to hold. Teams moved in grids across steep slopes, deep valleys, and dense forest patches where visibility dropped to almost nothing. But the mountain remained unchanged. No clothing was found, no footprints were confirmed, no broken trail signs led anywhere meaningful. It was as if Dennis Martin had simply stepped out of existence the moment he entered the brush. Then came the unsettling reports. Some searchers claimed they saw unusual disturbances deep in the forest, movement between trees that didn't match any known animal pattern. Others spoke quietly about faint impressions on soft ground that suggested a child-sized footprint, but they were never clearly verified. Every lead seemed to dissolve under closer inspection. The weather continued to make things worse. Rain had softened the entire region, and fog rolled through the valleys like a living presence. Even experienced search teams admitted that the terrain felt disorienting, as if distances were shifting and familiar landmarks looked different from one hour to the next. Despite all efforts, the search began to slow. After days of exhausting coverage, the massive operation started scaling back. Hundreds of acres had been checked, rechecked, and checked again, but there was still no answer. Eventually, the official search was called off. The disappearance of Dennis Martin remained unsolved. Years later, the case would gain renewed attention through interviews and independent investigations. Some witnesses who were present that day mentioned hearing something strange in the forest, a sudden scream in the woods that didn't match any normal hiking activity. Others recalled a vague, unsettling story of something large moving through the trees, but details were unclear and never confirmed. One of the most controversial accounts suggested that a distant figure was seen moving across a mountainside, carrying something over its shoulder. However, this report was never verified by official investigators and remains highly disputed. Even today, the truth is unknown. There are no confirmed answers, no physical evidence, and no closure. Only questions remain.
Did Dennis Martin simply become lost in one of the most dangerous wilderness areas in America, hidden forever by terrain and weather? Or did something in the Smoky Mountains take him in a way that no search effort could ever understand? The forest never answered, and it still hasn't.
Before the most terrifying part of the story begins, I need to ask, are you listening from somewhere isolated right now? Is your heart starting to race? Don't forget to tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe or follow now to join this journey into fear.
Deep within the Great Smoky Mountains National Park lies a lesser-known stretch of wilderness, far away from popular trails and crowded viewpoints. Among experienced hikers and local folklore circles, there is one name that appears again and again in quiet conversations: Camp 19. Officially, it is just a remote backcountry campsite surrounded by dense forest, steep slopes, and a silence so heavy that even footsteps feel amplified. There is nothing visibly unusual about it during the day. The trees stand tall, the wind moves gently through the branches, and the forest behaves like any other part of the Smokies. But as night falls, the story changes. According to scattered reports from hikers over the years, something strange begins to happen after dark. It does not happen every night, and it does not happen to everyone. But those who claim to have experienced it describe the same unsettling sequence of events. It begins with sound. Far away at first, barely noticeable, the faint clinking of metal against metal, like forks and knives touching plates. Then comes laughter, not the laughter of a single person, but many voices layered together, as if a large group has gathered somewhere deep in the forest. The sounds carry through the trees in a way that makes it impossible to determine direction. Hikers often assume it is another camping group that has set up nearby. After all, in the Smokies, it is not unusual to encounter others on remote trails, and so curiosity replaces caution. Then comes the smell, a faint scent of cooked meat drifting through the air, mixed with wood smoke, warm, inviting, almost comforting. Along with it, some report hearing horses, soft movements in the distance, as if riders have just arrived at a hidden gathering deep in the woods. The forest begins to feel alive with celebration. Those who experience it often describe seeing a soft orange glow between the trees, not bright enough to fully reveal its source, but enough to suggest a large campfire burning somewhere just beyond sight. Shadows move around it, human-shaped silhouettes shifting and gathering, as if a feast or celebration is taking place. And then curiosity takes over completely. Many hikers, believing they have stumbled upon a late-night gathering, step out of their tents or move toward the light to greet the others. Some even report calling out, preparing to introduce themselves, expecting friendly voices and shared stories around a fire. But the moment they step forward, everything changes. The sounds stop. The laughter disappears instantly, as if someone cut the forest itself into silence. The clinking of dishes vanishes. Even the smell of food seems to fade away within seconds. The orange glow between the trees flickers and then goes completely dark. What remains is only the forest. Cold air, absolute silence, no fire, no people, no movement, nothing. Just empty darkness where a moment before there had been life, laughter, and light. Hikers are often left standing alone, confused, trying to understand what they just experienced. Some return quickly to their tents.
Others leave the area entirely before sunrise. And the most disturbing part? No physical evidence is ever found. No campsite, no ashes, no footprints, nothing that suggests anyone or anything was ever there. Camp 19 remains just a location on a map, but for those who have heard the feast in the dark, it is something far more unsettling. A place that feels like it is watching, waiting, and pretending to be alive, only when the forest is listening.
For most hikers, Camp 19 remains nothing more than a quiet, remote spot in the Great Smoky Mountains. But for those few who have stayed overnight there and lived to talk about it, the experience often begins the same way: normal, peaceful, and completely ordinary. The forest at dusk is calm. The wind moves gently through the trees, and the fading light creates long shadows across the ground. Birds go silent one by one, and the mountain slowly slips into darkness. At first, nothing feels unusual. Many campers even describe it as one of the most peaceful nights they have ever experienced in the wilderness. But sometime after midnight, that peace begins to break. It usually starts with subtle sounds, a faint crackle of firewood, even when no fire is present nearby. Then the distant murmur of voices, soft, overlapping, indistinct. It does not sound aggressive or threatening. Instead, it feels social, like people talking, laughing, and sharing a moment just out of sight. Some hikers report hearing footsteps circling their campsite, slow, deliberate movement through dry leaves, not running, not rushing, just walking, as if someone is calmly passing by in the dark. When they shine a flashlight into the trees, there is nothing there. No movement, no reflection, no source of the sound. Still, the noises continue. In some accounts, the sounds grow clearer, the clinking of utensils, the shifting of chairs or logs, even the faint sound of horses breathing or shifting their weight in the distance. It creates the impression that a large, hidden gathering is happening just beyond the reach of visibility. And then comes the most unsettling moment, a sudden realization that the sounds are not random, they are coordinated. Laughter rises at the same time from multiple directions. A fire seems to crackle in rhythm with the voices. It feels structured, almost like a scene being repeated rather than naturally occurring. Some hikers, overwhelmed by curiosity or confusion, step outside their tents to investigate. Others call out, thinking they have stumbled upon another group of campers. But every time someone tries to approach the sound, it reacts in the same way. It stops, instantly. No fade, no transition, just silence, sharp and absolute, as if someone turned the forest off. And then the darkness feels heavier. The temperature seems to drop slightly. The wind slows. Even the forest sounds, crickets, insects, rustling leaves, become distant or disappear entirely. It feels as though the mountain itself is holding its breath. When light is shined again into the woods, there is nothing but empty forest. No fire, no people, no horses, no signs of movement at all, as if whatever was there had never existed in the first place. The most disturbing part is what hikers notice afterward. Many report feeling watched, not in a clear, visible way, but in a subtle, constant awareness, like something is aware of them, observing their reactions, waiting for them to respond again. Some leave Camp 19 before sunrise and never return. Others refuse to speak about it again. And a few insist on the same conclusion. Whatever is happening at Camp 19 is not a normal campsite experience. It is something that appears only when the forest chooses to show it, and disappears the moment it is acknowledged too closely.
Over the years, Camp 19 has developed a reputation that exists mostly in whispers, passed between hikers, discussed in small forums, or mentioned briefly by locals who prefer not to explain too much. Officially, it is just another backcountry campsite in the Great Smoky Mountains, nothing more, nothing unusual. But stories don't disappear just because they are not officially recorded. They continue. And Camp 19's story always ends the same way: confusion, silence, and an unanswered question. Those who claim to have experienced the feast in the woods often describe a final moment that lingers longer than anything else. After the sudden disappearance of all sounds, the laughter, the firelight, the clinking of utensils, there is always a brief period of complete stillness, a silence so deep it feels unnatural. Then, slowly, the forest returns to normal. Crickets resume, leaves move in the wind again. The darkness becomes just darkness, not something heavier or watching. But what disturbs people most is what is missing. There are no signs that anything ever happened. No burnt ground where a fire might have been. No scattered remains of food. No footprints leading in or out. Even the soil appears untouched, as if no gathering, no movement, and no presence had ever existed there at all. It is this absence that makes the legend grow stronger, because hikers begin to realize something unsettling. Whatever they heard left no trace. Over time, different theories have emerged. Some say it is nothing more than sound distortion in the mountains, wind carrying echoes in strange ways through valleys and ridges. Others believe it is psychological, the mind filling silence with familiar patterns when isolated in the wilderness. But those who have experienced it rarely accept simple explanations. They describe something more specific, more intentional, as if the forest is not just echoing sound, but presenting something, a moment, a scene, a gathering that feels almost real enough to step into, but only until you try. And every time someone tries to confirm it, it disappears. No one has ever found Camp 19 occupied. No confirmed group of hikers has ever been documented recreating these events. No evidence of repeated camps, large gatherings, or hidden trails has ever been discovered. Only stories remain. And the consistency of those stories is what makes them difficult to ignore. Because across different years, different people, and different circumstances, the details never change. The sound of a fire in the dark, the feeling of a celebration just beyond sight, the sudden silence when you move closer, and the emptiness that follows. Camp 19 stands today as just another coordinate in a vast national park, a place most hikers pass without ever noticing, a place that looks identical to any other stretch of forest. But for those who have heard the feast that vanishes at dawn, it is something else entirely. A reminder that in the Smoky Mountains, not everything that feels real is meant to be found, and not everything that disappears was ever truly gone.
Before the most terrifying part of the story begins, I need to ask, are you listening from somewhere isolated right now? Is your heart starting to race?
Don't forget to tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe or follow now to join this journey into fear.
High along the Tennessee-North Carolina border lies a lesser-known peak called Blanket Mountain. It is not one of the most famous destinations in the Great Smoky Mountains, nor does it attract heavy tourist traffic. Instead, it is the kind of place hikers describe as quiet, steep, and strangely isolating, where the fog often settles so thickly that it feels like the mountain is wrapped in a living blanket. The trails here are rough, unofficial in places, and physically demanding. Locals sometimes refer to sections as manways, paths that are not fully maintained and feel more like old routes carved through the wilderness than modern hiking trails. The deeper you go, the more the forest seems to close in behind you. It was on one of these routes that a couple decided to hike together toward the summit. They were experienced hikers, familiar with the challenges of mountain terrain. Their plan was simple. The man preferred to take his time, stopping often to take photographs of the landscape, while the woman hiked ahead at a faster pace. To stay connected, they carried walkie-talkies, an ordinary precaution for a place where signal strength was unreliable. For the first part of the hike, everything felt normal. The forest was quiet but steady. Birds moved between branches. Wind passed through the trees in soft waves. Occasionally, they checked in with each other over the radio, confirming distance and direction. There was no sign of anything unusual. Hours later, the woman reached the upper part of the trail near the summit, close to an old fire tower structure. She waited there, resting at the base, while the man continued his slower ascent behind her, still stopping occasionally to take photos. The mountain was silent. Then, something strange happened. The man heard a voice. It was faint at first, almost like it was carried through the wind. A single word, a call for help. He stopped immediately and looked around him. The forest was empty, no movement, no visible source, just trees and fog. He picked up his radio and tried to contact his wife. No response. A few moments later, the voice came again, closer this time. "Help me." The man froze. It did not sound like his wife. It did not sound like any known voice over the radio either. It felt external, as if it was coming from somewhere in the forest itself. He called out loudly, asking if anyone was there. Only silence answered him. Still, he continued upward, unsettled but unsure of what else to do. The mountain trail was narrow, and turning back felt unnecessary, but the feeling of being watched slowly began to build around him. Then, the radio crackled. His wife's voice came through. She asked him a simple question. "Did you just call for help?" The man stopped walking. He had not. She explained that she had heard a voice over the radio, his voice, calling out near her location, but he was still far below her position on the mountain. Now both of them were confused. Two separate locations, two separate experiences, but the same distress call, and neither of them had made it. The forest between them suddenly felt larger, heavier, and far less stable than before. Something on Blanket Mountain was mimicking voices, or something else was using them.
After the first unsettling exchange on Blanket Mountain, both hikers tried to regain control of the situation. The man continued upward toward the summit, while the woman stayed near the old fire tower, both attempting to make sense of what they had just experienced over the radios. At first, they assumed it was interference,
Mountains are known for strange radio behavior. Signals bounce, distort, and sometimes even repeat fragments of sound. But what happened next did not feel like normal interference, because the voice came back. This time it was clearer. The man heard it again through the forest, faint, urgent, calling out for help. He stopped walking immediately, scanning the trees around him. The fog had grown thicker now, reducing visibility to only a few meters. Everything beyond that distance disappeared into a gray, shifting wall. He reached for his radio again. No response from his wife. But instead of silence, the device crackled. And then his own voice came through. Not a recording, not delayed static. It sounded immediate, as if he was speaking in real time from somewhere else on the mountain. The voice said the same thing again. "Help me." The man froze. He had not spoken. He had not transmitted anything. Yet the radio was repeating him perfectly. Meanwhile, the woman at the summit experienced something equally disturbing. She heard his voice over the radio calling for help, even though she could see no reason for distress from her position. The forest around her was still, but the signal in her hand insisted otherwise. Both hikers now faced the same terrifying realization. The mountain was creating a second version of their communication, a version that did not match reality. The man tried switching channels, the woman did the same, but no matter what frequency they used, the pattern repeated itself. Distorted calls for help, fragmented sentences, and occasional bursts of silence that felt heavier than sound. Then came something worse. The voice stopped sounding distant. It started sounding close, too close. At one point, the man turned sharply, convinced someone was walking behind him through the fog. He saw nothing, only shifting gray and tree silhouettes barely visible in the mist. But the sensation did not go away. It felt like something was pacing him, matching his movement step for step. The woman, too, began to feel it. From the summit, she heard movement near the fire tower. Slow, deliberate sounds that did not match wind or wildlife. When she called out over the radio, she received only one response: static, followed by her own voice again, repeating her words back to her, perfectly. At this point, the couple realized the most disturbing part of the experience. It was not just that the radio was malfunctioning. It was that the mountain seemed to be responding to them, not randomly, not naturally, but intelligently, as if it was listening, learning, and repeating only what it chose to echo back. The forest between them no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, and whatever was there was now inside their communication. By the time both hikers realized the full extent of what was happening on Blanket Mountain, it was already too late to treat it as a simple communication glitch or natural interference. The forest had stopped behaving like a normal environment. Every signal, every sound, and every response felt distorted, like something was actively shaping what they heard. The man continued his slow ascent through the fog, now fully alert, every sense focused on the feeling that he was not alone. The trail ahead was barely visible. Trees appeared and disappeared as the mist shifted. The air itself felt heavier, as if the mountain was holding something in place around him. From the summit, the woman tried repeatedly to re-establish stable communication. She changed channels, reset the device, and even turned it off for a moment before switching it back on again. Nothing worked in the way it should have. Instead of clarity, The radio continued to produce fragments, his voice, her voice, and occasionally words that neither of them had spoken at all. Then the situation shifted again. The calls for help stopped. For a brief moment, there was only silence. No static, no distortion, no voice repeating itself. Just complete and unnatural quiet. That silence felt worse than the noise, because now it felt intentional. The man stopped moving. He listened carefully. No wind, no birds, no distant forest activity. Even the usual ambient sounds of the Smoky Mountains seemed to disappear. It was as if the entire environment had paused. Then, very faintly, he heard it. A single voice, close but not clearly located. It was calm this time, not panicked, not distorted. It simply said, "Did you find it?" He froze. The woman heard the same phrase through the radio at the summit, but neither of them understood what it referred to. There was no shared context, no object, no agreed meaning, and yet the question repeated again, as if waiting for an answer that neither of them could give. When the man tried to respond, his radio did not transmit his voice properly. Instead, it echoed something else back to him, a version of his answer that he had not said, a version that sounded slightly wrong, slightly delayed, slightly aware. At that moment, both hikers made the same decision independently. They needed to leave the mountain immediately. But leaving Blanket Mountain was not as simple as turning around. The fog had thickened further. The trail they had used earlier was no longer clearly visible. Landmarks that should have been easy to recognize seemed distorted or misplaced. The environment felt subtly reorganized, as if the mountain was no longer presenting the same geography they had climbed through. They attempted to reconnect through the radios one final time. No clear signal came through, only a final burst of static, and inside that static, one last fragment of sound, their own voices calling each other's names from different directions than expected. After that, complete silence returned. No confirmed records exist of what happened next in official reports, and there is no documented conclusion to the experience. The hikers were never linked to any verified incident involving injury or disappearance on Blanket Mountain during that time, leaving only their account as the basis for the story. But among local legends and repeated oral accounts, the pattern remains unchanged. Blanket Mountain creates voices that should not exist. It repeats what you say. It answers what you don't ask. And when you finally decide to leave, it sounds like something is still responding behind you, even after you are gone.
And with that, tonight's terrifying story comes to an end. But remember, the deeper the night grows, the thicker the hidden mysteries become. Follow or subscribe now for more horrifying stories, if you dare.